The holographic skies of the alien world Syrexis burned a sickly yellow-orange, its star-vomiting plasma flares that licked at the upper atmosphere. Most species took one look at the data feeds and decided that the place wasn't worth the effort. Too hot, too chaotic, an inevitable extinction event waiting to happen. But for Commander Troy Vance, inevitable extinction event was an enticing challenge, almost a warm invitation. Why no? We could have gone somewhere with palm trees and breathable air, grumbled Bexley, a wiry technician with a talent for finding new ways to avoid the front lines. His skin glistened with anti-rad gel. Instead, we're here trying to retrieve a what again? Egg, Troy replied, adjusting the strap of his containment pack as he marched over jagged obsidian terrain. Specifically the last egg of an Axorian apex. Probably the deadliest predator Syrexis has ever seen. Right, no big deal, Bexley muttered. Except for the part where the thing inside could probably dismember a tank with its teeth. And we're saving it, Troy said with a toothy grin, the kind that had infuriated and endeared his squad in equal measure over the years. So maybe focus up. The third member of their team, Ylvara, a lean Centrixian biologist with scales that glimmered emerald in the half-light, hissed, "I do not comprehend human attachments to such suicidal missions. This egg represents a danger beyond any measurable index. The risk is why you're here," Doc Troy interrupted, swiping sweat off his brow. "You're going to keep it stable, make sure it doesn't hatch into a premature killing spree." Ylvara's vertical pupils narrowed. "I agreed to study it, not raise it. And might I remind you, Commander, that Naxorian apexes bond to the first living thing they see, a primitive imprinting reflex." "Yes, yes, like a murderous duckling. We've been briefed." Troy hopped across a gash in the terrain, magma churning below. "Just keep your nerves intact, and let's make some history." The trio reached the craggy ledge that overlooked their destination. Below, nestled among twisted rocks and the cracked ruins of an ancient Naxorian temple, lay the egg. It was massive, easily the size of a small ground vehicle, and its shell shimmered with colors that shifted and danced like trapped galaxies. Energy radiated from it, the air itself vibrating with a low hum. "That's it," Bexley breathed, awed despite himself. "The egg of a god killer." "Focus," Team Troy barked, eyes scanning for threats. Syrexis had already made it abundantly clear it wanted the egg destroyed, if not by seismic upheaval, then by the swarms of hostile fauna that had attacked them every step of the way. "We have exactly one shot at this." As if on cue, the ground beneath them shook. Cracks spiderwebbed outward, fissures glowing hot with molten rock. From the shadows of the temple ruins, dozens of quadrupedal creatures emerged, their bony crests vibrating as they emitted a piercing, warbling call. Grivax Ylvara spat, producing a dart gun filled with toxins potent enough to fell creatures many times their size. "They will not let us take it." "Of course not," Troy said. He unslung his pulse rifle. "Bexley, extraction prep. Ylvara, keep an eye on our future war pet." The ensuing battle was chaotic and frenzied, a desperate defense of the egg, as the Grivax charged with reckless abandon. The creature's scales deflected standard rounds, forcing Troy to use every trick in his playbook: grenades, shockwave mines, and good old-fashioned hand-to-claw combat. The smell of scorched flesh and metallic blood filled the air. Bexley, meanwhile, frantically set up containment protocols around the egg, yelling, "Any faster, and I'd be in reverse." Ylvara held her own, darting in and out of danger, her biologist's precision applied lethally. But their line was faltering, the Grivax seemed endless. Until it happened. A sudden crack echoed through the battlefield. For one breathless moment, everything stopped. The Grivax, their team, even the planet itself seemed to hold its breath. A fissure ran down the egg's surface, light spilling out. Bexley began. "That wasn't us, right?" The egg split, revealing a creature unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, its eyes burning with an intelligence both ancient and frighteningly new locked onto the chaos around it. With a sound between a roar and a sonic shockwave, it leapt into action, tearing through Grivax with predatory grace. It fought not out of training or strategy, but sheer primal instinct. This was an apex born into battle. Troy's heart hammered in his chest. Looks like it knows whose side it's on. It does not, Ylvara corrected, horrified and fascinated. It only sees threats. But the creature paused when its gaze met Troy's. There was recognition and imprint, just as Ylvara had warned. The newborn predator lowered its head, almost curious. Troy reached out, his hand trembling. "Hey there, buddy!" Ylvara hissed. "Do not touch." Too late. The Nexorian apex leaned in, nuzzling him, and emitted a sound like a bass rumble of affection. The Grivaks were forgotten. The bond was made. Bexley gaped. "Troy, you just got a murder lizard to like you." The creature growled lowly, as if insulted by the term. Back at the Forward Operations Base rechristened Camp Apex in light of recent events, the situation was equal parts triumphant and utterly absurd. They had saved the egg. The Naxorian Apex was now under their protection. And it refused to leave Troy's side. Scientists across allied worlds bombarded them with communication requests, while military strategists salivated at the implications of a war beast that could be trained or at least pointed in a useful direction. The apex predator, which Troy decided to name Krekka because it seemed to respond favorably to harsh, guttural sounds, was already proving to be both a boon and a nightmare. Ylvara spent her days analyzing Krekka's physiology, while Bexley rigged increasingly elaborate containment measures to protect everyone else. Not that Krekka seemed inclined to harm the humans, it viewed them as curious packmates, albeit tiny and squishy. Training sessions quickly spiraled into absurdity. In one memorable instance, Krekka chased a reconnaissance drone like a playful canine, only to accidentally obliterate it mid-pounce. Military officials observing the session via holofeed were not amused. Troy, however, couldn't stop laughing. Commander, a steely-eyed general, growled over comms. "Your pet cost us 2 million credits." "He's learning," Troy replied, patting Krekka's scaled flank. "A bit rough on the toys, sure, but we'll get there." It wasn't long before rumors spread. Entire battle groups spoke of the human who tamed the apex, and enemy factions scrambled to understand what manner of beast would march with the Alliance's forces. Mercenaries took one look at the data and tripled their fees. Rebellions faltered. Somewhere, far from Syrexis, Troy imagined shadowy figures pulling out hair equivalents over grainy footage of a human calmly sharing a meal with what should have been a living nightmare. But there were still dangers. Krekka's loyalty was no safeguard against its volatile nature. Any perceived threat sent it into a destructive frenzy. Once, during a surprise inspection by overly curious diplomats, a drop tray triggered chaos. Krekka demolished half the mess hall before realizing the enemy was merely clanging metal. Apologies were given, though not accepted graciously. "This is insane," Ylvara said during a rare quiet moment in the lab. "No creature of this scale has ever been bonded, let alone controlled." "We're not controlling him," Troy said, tossing Krekka a chunk of synthetic protein, which it snapped up with alarming speed. "It's trust. That's the secret." Ylvara stared at him as though he'd just announced a plan to make gravity optional. Trust? That? It is a weapon of untold capacity. Yet, Troy said, scratching behind Krekka's spiny crest, earning a deep rumble of contentment. But it's also a living thing. Maybe it just needs to know it's not alone. For a moment, Ylvara said nothing. Then humans are difficult to quantify. Part of our charm, Troy quipped. The reality of what they'd done became starkly clear during a crisis 3 months later. A hostile fleet launched an incursion against an allied colony, their mission to demoralize and destroy. Command sent every available unit, but hope was slim. The enemy had numbers, firepower, and tactical advantage. Until Krekka arrived. Beneath starlit skies, Troy led a charge like no other. Krekka barreled through enemy lines, a nightmare come to life. Its roar shattered sonic barriers, its claws cleaved armored mechs in two. Troops rallied behind it, terrified but exhilarated. It was a decisive rout of victory no one could have imagined. Later, as Troy stood atop the wreckage, a weary smile on his face, Krekka prowled around him, ever watchful. He thought of what it had taken to save that egg, the battles, the chaos, the stubborn hope that had kept them going. This was no pet. This was a companion, a reminder that even in a galaxy of nightmares, there were bonds worth fighting for. Bexley sidled up, bruised but grinning. "Hey, Commander. Think Krekka's ready for tricks? I'm thinking fetch the battleship." Troy laughed, tired but triumphant. "Let's work on Sit first." Ylvara, standing nearby, shook her head with something like reluctant admiration. "Humans. Impossible." "Exactly," Troy said, clapping a hand to Krekka's side. "And it's why we win." The celebration after their victory was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Soldiers from a dozen worlds mingled, sharing drinks and laughter as they replayed their close calls and improbable triumphs. The unlikely hero of the hour, Krekka, sat just outside the main encampment, being watched from a respectful distance by every curious pair of eyes. Occasionally, the apex predator let out a low, satisfied rumble, as if enjoying the energy of the revelers. Troy, meanwhile, nursed a drink in the command tent, exhaustion seeping into every bone. Bexley and Ylvara joined him, bringing news and the usual banter. "So apparently you're trending across 5 systems," Bexley said, plopping down beside Troy with a stack of data pads. "Some call you the Apex Whisperer, others think you've lost your mind, but the whispers are the loudest. Merchandising is inevitable." "Perfect," Troy muttered, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. "Just what every commander wants bobblehead dolls of their war pet." "Do not dismiss this lightly," Commander Vance Ylvara cut in, her voice low but firm. She had been increasingly blunt since the battle, her usual veneer of detached professionalism cracking. "You wield a creature that defies known hierarchies. Power of that magnitude breeds ambition. The Alliance may try to control it, or you." "They can try," Troy said, taking a long drink. "But they'd have to get past Krekka first, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't like politicians." Ylvara's expression soured. The Alliance's control may be far from the only problem. "What are you getting at?" Bexley asked, glancing nervously at her. She placed a small holo disc on the table. It flickered to life, showing dark ships with angular designs. "The Sithari Syndicate. They have been monitoring our activities with increasing interest. There are whispers they possess weapons tailored to Apex-class bioforms. This war was an audition for them." Troy's eyes darkened. "You're saying they'll come for Krekka?" "Not just come. They'll study, capture, and, if needed, destroy him. They fear what he represents." Bexley swallowed. "Well, that's a comforting thought." "Thanks, Ylvara." Troy pushed himself to his feet, gaze resolute. "Then we won't make it easy for them. Krekka's part of this team. If they want him, they'll have to go through every last one of us." Outside, Krekka stirred, almost as if sensing the weight of the conversation. The night passed with heavy thoughts and quiet resolve. Over the next few weeks, preparation became their mantra. Krekka's combat prowess, though extraordinary, needed focus and refinement. Troy knew that raw instinct could only take them so far against enemies who knew every trick. Training sessions, this time under stricter protocols, became daily routines. Bexley rigged up holographic combat simulations, programming them to mimic Syndicate attack patterns. Ylvara conducted deep scans, identifying ways to enhance Krekka's resilience through diet, genetic stimulation, and mental conditioning. But training Krekka was unlike anything Troy had ever encountered. On one occasion, Krekka encountered a drone programmed to imitate a Syndicate soldier. Instead of attacking, the apex predator tilted its massive head and sniffed it. Then, as if annoyed by its lack of a genuine scent, Krekka smashed the drone with a flick of its tail and wandered off. "Yup, definitely a murder lizard with standards," Bexley quipped from behind a protective shield. Troy shook his head. "It's not just mindless fighting for him. He knows what's real. He knows what counts." "Too real, if you ask me," Bexley said, eyeing the scattered remains of the drone. It wasn't all destructive chaos. As weeks turned into months, a strange rhythm formed. Krekka began to grasp signals and gestures. He could distinguish between friend and foe, recognize flanking attempts, even anticipate ambushes. Once, During a surprise inspection by high-ranking Alliance officials, Krekka stepped in front of Troy, growling low, when an over-eager security detail approached too quickly. The officials blanched and backed off. "You know," Bexley whispered later, "you could probably stage a coup with just a dirty look." Troy shot him a withering glance. "Not the goal here, Bex." But there were victories. Krekka's control grew, his bond with Troy became unshakable. They sparred against war mechs in controlled scenarios, emerging victorious more often than not. Word spread. The stories grew grander, more exaggerated. Humans and apex beasts, a tale to shake empires. Yet trouble arrived soon enough. A Syndicate task force emerged on the fringes of Allied space, advancing with surgical precision. Their message was clear: turn over the apex, or watch the colonies burn. It was a classic play, but with stakes higher than any battle Troy had fought before. Command wanted compliance. Public sentiment, however, was less forgiving. People rallied around Krekka and his improbable bond with the stubborn human. Commands officially lost their backbone. Bexley fumed in their quarters. "They're considering negotiations." Troy paced, jaw clenched. "Not on my watch." "Defiance will cost you," Lavara said, tone cool. "They will brand you a renegade. Possibly worse." Troy looked out the viewport where Krekka rested, moonlight casting an ethereal glow over his scales. "Then we fight." The battle for Chiron IV was unlike any the galaxy had witnessed. The Syndicate unleashed horrors meant to break spirits, bioengineered monstrosities, weapons that twisted gravity, and neural disruptors designed to cripple organic minds. But Troy and Krekka met them every step of the way. Krekka's ferocity and cunning outmatched anything thrown at them, shredding war machines and scattering foot soldiers. At one crucial juncture, Troy's team, battered and running low on supplies, found themselves pinned near an ancient ruin. Syndicate forces closed in, their siege engines primed. It was the end. Until Krekka intervened. In one monumental act, the apex predator leaped into the heart of enemy lines, carving a path of devastation that defied comprehension. Troy's shouts mingled with the screams of Syndicate soldiers. But this time, Krekka's rage was not blind. Every step, every strike was controlled, deliberate. He shielded allies, dismantled threats with surgical precision. It was as if he had transcended his role as a beast of war, becoming a protector, no, a guardian. The Syndicate withdrew. Their defeat was absolute. The aftermath was sobering. Bodies littered the battlefield, and scars marred the land. As medics tended to the wounded, Troy approached Krekka, whose chest heaved with exhaustion. The apex predator lowered his head, allowing Troy to rest a hand on his warm, battle-worn scales. "You did good, buddy," Troy whispered, voice thick with emotion. Krekka rumbled softly, and for a moment Troy swore he saw recognition, gratitude in those ancient eyes. Ylvara approached, her face unreadable. "What now, Commander? They will come again." "They will," Troy said, eyes hardening. "But we'll be ready. Krekka isn't just a weapon, he's family." "You humans and your irrational attachments," Ylvara murmured, though a glimmer of respect softened her words. "Perhaps it is your greatest strength." "Or our greatest weakness," Troy said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Guess we'll find out." The days that followed were a mix of rebuilding and vigilance. The Syndicate threat was diminished, but not gone. They would come again, and others would rise, drawn by fear, by awe, or by greed. Krekka remained at Troy's side through it all, ever watchful. The galaxy had changed the day they saved the last apex predator egg, and it would never be the same. And in that they found hope, not in invincible strength or perfect control, but in loyalty born of struggle and trust. Together, they would face whatever came next, as man and apex, side by side. The calm that followed the battle for Chiron IV was short-lived. Though the Syndicate's forces had retreated, the uneasy peace was fragile. The Alliance scrambled to rebuild, deploying diplomats and negotiators to appease rattled systems while preparing for the inevitable resurgence of conflict. Meanwhile, Troy and his team were treated alternately as heroes and potential threats. Troy tried to focus on what he could control, training Krekka, building trust among their allies and keeping his team together. The galaxy's eyes never left them, and the weight of constant scrutiny pressed heavy on his shoulders. "Do you ever get the feeling we're just one mistake away from being hunted ourselves?" Bexley asked one evening. They stood on the ramparts of an Alliance stronghold, the wind carrying the scent of ash and victory. Troy crossed his arms, gaze fixed on the horizon. Every day. The question wasn't unfounded. Whispers of fear and doubt had begun to circulate. The Alliance Council debated whether a creature as powerful as Krekka posed more risk than reward. Some pushed for relocation to a secure facility, one where Krekka could be monitored, a thinly veiled way of saying imprisoned. But before any decision could be made, reality intervened. A burst of encrypted transmissions shattered the night's quiet. Ylvara intercepted the signals, her scales bristling as she translated. Multiple incursions. Syndicate warships are moving on 3 allied systems simultaneously. "Then it's not over," Troy said, jaw tight. "Not even close," Ylvara replied grimly. In response, the Alliance marshaled every available force, deploying ships and troops to protect critical worlds. Troy's unit, with Krekka at its core, was assigned to defend Neri's IV, a sprawling water world known for its shipyards and crucial energy reserves. The Syndicate wanted to cripple supply lines, and they would stop at nothing. As their transport hurtled toward the besieged planet, Bexley fidgeted, checking and rechecking his gear. "You think Krekka knows what's coming?" "He knows," Troy said, glancing at the apex predator secured in the adjacent bay. Krekka's eyes glowed faintly, as if attuned to the tension in the air. "He's ready." The battle for Neri's IV began with fire and fury. Syndicate warships rained destruction from orbit, their precision strikes targeting vital infrastructure. Troy's team landed amidst chaos, the scent of scorched metal and salt water assaulting their senses. The battlefields were a mix of submerged platforms and islands, forcing them to fight on uneven terrain. "Get the civilians clear," Troy barked, motioning for Bexley and Ylvara to establish a perimeter. Explosions erupted around them as Syndicate ground troops surged forward. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were elite units armed with biodisruptors, devices specifically designed to incapacitate Apex-class entities. Their goal was clear: neutralize Krekka at any cost. Troy and Krekka met the Syndicate head-on. The Predator's roar reverberated through metal and water, and its claws carved through enemy formations with terrifying speed. Syndicate warriors tried to coordinate, their disruptors unleashing pulses of energy, but Krekka adapted with startling intelligence. He evaded, struck back, and shielded his allies with a ferocity that left seasoned soldiers in awe. But the Syndicate had a trump card. From the depths of the ocean, a massive war mech rose, its limbs crackling with energy fields designed to bind and subdue. The mech's operators broadcast a single message: turn over the apex, and your people will be spared. Troy sneered. Not happening. The mech charged, sending waves crashing as it closed the distance. Krekka lunged, meeting it with a force that shook the battlefield. The two titans clashed in a brutal display of power, metal against flesh, technology against primal instinct. Sparks flew, and water boiled around them. Troy led his team in a desperate effort to weaken the mech's defenses. "Focus fire on the joints," he shouted, aiming for exposed mechanisms. Ylvara fired concentrated bursts of energy, while Bexley set charges along weakened armor. Still, the mech was relentless, its operators intent on binding Krekka with electrified chains that cut deep into his scales. Krekka roared in pain but refused to yield. "Come on," Krekka, Troy whispered, every muscle tensed. "You can do this." Then, in a moment that would be recounted in war songs for generations, Krekka twisted, shattering the chains with a mighty flex of his body. His claws tore into the mech's core, ripping out circuitry and sending the construct crashing into the depths. Victory was within their grasp, but it came at a cost. Krekka emerged from the water, his body battered, blood seeping from deep wounds. He stumbled, and Troy ran to his side. "Hold on, buddy, you did it." Krekka's eyes met his, filled with exhaustion but also determination. He rumbled softly, as if reassuring Troy that he was far from done. "You stubborn, magnificent beast," Troy said, his voice breaking. The Syndicate, seeing their ultimate weapon defeated, retreated. The Alliance forces cheered, but Troy knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Krekka needed care, and quickly. Ylvara approached, concern etched across her features. "Commander, he needs immediate medical attention. I can stabilize him, but we must act now." Together, they moved to a secure location, shielding Krekka from prying eyes. Ylvara worked tirelessly, applying a mixture of advanced medicine and ancient techniques known only to her people. Troy never left Krekka's side, even as the apex predator's breathing slowed. "He saved us," Troy said quietly. "All of us." "His will to survive is unparalleled," Ylvara said, her hands never faltering. "As is his bond with you. I have never seen anything like it." Days passed, and slowly Krekka's strength returned. He bore new scars, physical reminders of the battles they'd fought, but his spirit remained unbroken. In quiet moments, Troy sat with him, reflecting on how far they'd come. Bexley, ever the pragmatist, summed it up best. "So what's the next move, Commander? The Syndicate's not done. Neither is anyone else who wants a piece of this." "We keep fighting," Troy said, determination burning in his eyes. "But not alone. Krekka's not a weapon to be used. He's a symbol proof that even in a galaxy full of fear, there's hope." Ylvara nodded, her skepticism tempered by respect. "And what of those who fear him? Who fear you?" Troy stood, placing a hand on Krekka's scaled shoulder. "We show them what trust can do. We show them that strength isn't about control, it's about choice. Together." Krekka rumbled his agreement, eyes gleaming with fierce loyalty. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them side by side, man and apex. Family. The story of Commander Troy Vance and Krekka became legend tales of bravery, loyalty, and impossible odds. In the end, it wasn't just about saving an egg. It was about forging a bond that defied the very fabric of the galaxy, reminding everyone that hope, even in the form of a massive, war-born predator, could change everything.